Hey, everybody. Javan Bernakevitch here with Zack Weiss. Is it Weiss or Weiss or
It's Weiss, Weiss, whatever.
Adel?
I'm not too particular about names, but Weiss, I guess.
No Edelweiss going on?
Yeah, substantially Americanized.
Zack is a longtime colleague and friend. You guys have seen videos of us before. And Zack came back into range, really. Came back into stable Wi-Fi range. And we've been talking the last couple of months about having a couple conversations, recording them and throwing them up. And so what we decided to do was do a really short conversation about water. Now, we're going to try and keep it under 10 minutes, maybe less. I don't know. We'll see how judicious we can be with our words. And then lead you into a much broader conversation, maybe 40, 45 minutes, kind of plumbing the depths of Zack's conversation about water, his sense, where he sees the opportunities, where he sees the constraints. So that's what we got planned for you today. As usual, if you like the video, hit like. If you don't like the video, say nothing, just leave. And no, you say what you want to say. That's the point of social media. Feel free to subscribe and feel free to check out Zack's work at elementalecosystems.com. He does exceptional work the world over. And I think that's where we're going to start. So Zack, when we started here, I was saying, it's kind of interesting because when we start with water, we usually start with what the annual rainfall is, what the max 24-hour event is, and that gives us a sense of what the total max load we might be dealing with is. And then we start to calculate the amount of capture area. And for folks sitting at home watching this for the first time, you've never played with water before, you can think of it this way: a millimeter of rain on a square meter, so a meter by meter, is 1 liter of water. For those of you that work in the imperial system, I'm sorry. I'm just generally sorry, because it's very difficult to do water calc. Well, it's not very difficult. You can do it, but it's definitely more cumbersome and complicated. But when we are taking a look at that capture, we're always thinking about what do we have coming down? What do we have as a roof area, be it on the ground or actually a roof? And then what are we working with? So I thought it might be interesting to start off with some metrics, asking Zack, all right, Zack, so let's say in the last couple of years since you've really been jumping into this work full time, being an international consultant and installer, roughly how many projects have you done?
I would guess it's somewhere around 50. I don't keep track perfectly. A lot of different size ones, some that are 6 weeks long and others that are a couple of days or a week. So if you include all the small ones in consultations, a good bit more than that, but probably 50 substantial projects, I'd say.
Awesome. Okay. So 50 projects, and in how many years thus far?
Uh, let's see. I started really stepping into this work in 2012.
So 50 projects, 5 years, 10 projects on average a year.
Yeah.
With
Yeah,
probably
something like that.
more weighted towards the end. Because it
Yeah.
seems like whenever I talk to you, it's like, and I slipped in a little trip to Bolivia. I did a small project. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How small? Oh, it's about 10 hectares. And okay, so about that, and how many countries have you worked in thus far?
Probably about 25 at this point.
Wow.
Mostly plenty of projects in North America, a good chunk in South America, a good chunk in Europe, a couple in Africa, and a couple in Oceania.
Okay. And as you take a look at all these projects, is there any place that what we're going to talk about today, general opportunities, general problems when it concerns water, that these principles, these practices don't apply?
From what I've found and experienced, I would say no. And I'd say that's actually the most surprising part is it doesn't matter if you're in a climate with 3 or 4 meters of rainfall, or if you're in a climate with half a meter of rainfall, people are experiencing the same things all the world over. And it's the same problems and stresses manifesting in the landscape.
Right. Right. And I think that's one of the most brilliant things is that once you get down to, call it nature-based law versus human-based law, it transcends the geopolitical conversation that we've placed over atop of land masses. And the water that falls in Canada is the water that falls in Kenya. The particulate, the total pH, potential contamination might be different, but it acts and behaves the same way. And the capturing and the storing of it is largely in the same way. And the fears, the frustrations, the constraints, and I love that you brought that up, same. Mostly, and we can start off with this principle, is that mostly it's that life is dependent on, and the amount of is dependent upon the water that's accessible. Once we have the water figured out, we've got 70, 75, 80% of the work done. It seems like the place to start. And when I asked you what you wanted to talk about today, you had a nice little phrase about water, which will help people understand what it is. Well, not what it is, but really the importance of it and how you place it in hierarchy.
And I think the analogy, and that's that water is the blood of the earth. It's the living liquid pumping through the earth, giving life to all other. 70% of all life is water. And usually the younger that life is, the more water it is. And so water really gives life. And I think as much as anything, it's just having that analogy that if you start to look at it as a body, it's the earth as a body and water as the blood, and just intellectualize that and bring it into yourself, you can start to understand a lot of what's going on with the cycles right now.
Mm. What I liked so much about this when you were talking about it is that it brought up for me, because my home area just went through a pretty massive flood after the snowpack melt. We had about 150% snowpack of norm, and we had very high temps in spring unseasonably. So it meant that not only did we get the rains that usually come with spring, but we also had the melt unseasonably at the same time. And when you have that in a place where we've been deforesting without proper forestry management practices or reforestation, when we then add to that forest fires, because we've had a management strategy over 100 to 150 years of put out every single fire you see, there's a hemorrhaging of water, right? That water doesn't actually come into the land, doesn't come into the marshland, doesn't stay within the body. It flows out and over the body, and you get, in both situations, dehydration. And for a person, that's death. And for the land, that's death.
Exactly. If you think of the veins getting clogged or dredged straight or bleeding out, it's and the scary thing to me is that they're all feedback loops. So the drier landscape gets, it has all these feedback loops to make it even drier thereafter. And the more hydrated, and same with your body, your health system, you can get into a place of stress and where it all feeds into itself in a negative way, or you can be in a different place where it all just keeps building and you have this really healthy immune system. I think that's also a good thing to conceptualize around the water cycling through the planet, is that it's part of the immune system. And I would even go so far as to say that probably these climate disturbances that we're experiencing are part of the immune system as well.
Interesting. So when we take a look at water, because this is going to be our short conversation, what are the must-knows? What are the important pieces that if somebody was going to walk away, you would absolutely want to pass on to them?
That I think one of the things would be that water exists in many different phases within our normal living range. And that's a really important piece. Thinking about water going from gas in the atmosphere to liquid vapor, moving to ice. It's one of the few elements that exists in multiple different forms within our living biome.
So when people are thinking about that and saying, okay, I got that, they're in different phases and phase states, and they can change from phase to phase, or they can do that beautiful sublimation where they'll go directly from snow into gas. Why is that important, or how do people apply that practically?
One of the things I think it's on a very big scale, which can be hard to, it's ambitious, but thinking about the biotic pump and basically the water being pulled inland by rain, by that change in volume from very voluminous gas vapor to liquid water, creates low pressure, enabling more humidity to draw in. And so this is a very important feedback that can lead to the desertification of a whole continent.
Or it can.
It has.
It has, or it could lead to the hydration of a continent.
Absolutely. That's one of the main feedback loops that we can either feed, or we can feed, but positively or negatively.
Right. So it's a bit like, just picking up on the feed thing, it's a bit like understanding how calories are consumed, or how the different macros, be it fat, protein, carbohydrates, and fibers consumed, and how they actually work in the body. Knowing that fat actually doesn't necessarily translate directly into fat. Sugar is actually more likely to transfer into long-term fat storage. It's understanding how the mechanism works to then understand how to interact or to leverage or to change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Understanding the elements at play and how they're cycling through the organism.
Right, right. So part of that phase state change conversation is understanding that, okay, yeah, I know the water cycle. I learned it in grade 4. I learned it in grade 7. I had to learn it again in high school. I had some kind of university class. I had to learn it. I took a course online. They're like, oh, the water cycle. And it's kind of like this little hammer that we keep hitting people over the head with. And it's dismissed because it was brought into our consciousness probably so early. And there was never that real-time felt understanding about why this was so valuable. And so part of what I'm getting is that when you're talking about phase states and you're playing with the scope and the scale of magnitude, the order of magnitude, it's really to imply that if something works at this level, this scale globally, then it influences every other aspect that it's dependent upon downstream, literally. And that's where we can play.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. So first thing, phases. What's another thing that people absolutely 100% need to understand?
I think a big thing that people need to understand is that it's a choice. That everything that you were just saying with the water cycle, I think also there's no actionable learning that happens. It's just this exists and here's how it happens, but we don't talk about how humans impact the water cycle. And so the potential for change and the potential for choice, I think, is a really important thing for people to know about water. It's your choice whether you have a hydrated landscape with plenty of water, or whether you're stuck in cycles of drought and fire and flood.
Mm. Mm. This really comes back to a lot of the work I do with folks around context, around understanding what your goals are, what you're doing, and how what you're doing affects the goals. And when we take a look at hydration, almost everywhere on the planet, we have a cycle of hydration. There's an area, or what's called distribution of rain over a year, or precipitation over a year. And there's certain times that we are eligible to capture that water. And there's certain times that we're able to store that water. And then there are other times down the road when we're not eligible because it's not falling from the sky. And it seems like more and more the conversation with folks that are in drought or are in problem or crisis is that they want water when it's not there, and they don't care to think, to program, to design, or to store that water when it is.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the result of many of the issues that we see all over the world today. From immigration issues are stemming from basic water cycle things that aren't being appropriately accounted for.
Well, this of course points to the fact that most of our settlements are by water. The major settlements of the world have always been by water. One, it's a lifeblood, as we were speaking about. Water is life, as Leonardo da Vinci famously said, and has been repeated ad nauseum throughout the ages. And then secondly, water is transportation. Water is how we connected the many settlements of humanity across the globe and came to each other. So the two of those major problems is that there's not enough water. Well, one, there's an issue of transportation because we can't actually get to where we need to go. If there's too much, we actually run the risk of losing those settlements that are in low-lying areas around coasts, around rivers. And then on the other side, we lose the ability to support the people there. When we take a look at much of what the Syrian conflict was about, was a lack of water and people leaving or fighting over that water. And as I think a number of people have seen from the financial institutions and the financial, I want to say predators, and it feels right. It's probably insulting to some of them, and to others who it isn't. But they have been looking at water rights, right? This was the big thing after the 2008 subprime mortgage shortage. Most of the gentlemen who saw that saw the next big problem being lack of water and started purchasing water rights. So when we think that folks that are, be it using the word or not, predatory, and having that sense, having that acumen to look forward, and that's what they're looking at, could that mean that this is something that we may want to look at? And in my mind, it's a yes.
And I think it behooves all people to look ahead and to forethink, and at least to open up yourself to the possibilities and consider it for yourself. Right. Absolutely.
So water has many different phases. The phases change. Those phase changes actually are the engine of the entire water cycle globally as we understand it, to some degrees that I don't think everybody does. And I think your example of large voluminous vapor then becoming condensed into rain and then pulling in low pressure, I think that's a brilliant example. It's something that not a lot of people understand. Then we move on to the fact that much of this is a choice. We can choose to capture and store, we can choose to hold, we can choose to hydrate, or we cannot. It's the wonderful thing about a prefrontal cortex. We can envision the future, we can remember the past. We don't have to be driven by instinct. And this really strengthens what I've said a number of times to a number of people's chagrin, is that drought is a choice. As long as we take a time span, if it's in the moment, it's like, oh, it's happening to me. It's like, well, yeah, but you lived a year ago when there was rain, and now you have no rain. So there was an opportunity, and there will be a time again next year to then pick up that water and be intelligent about its storage and its usage. So we've got phase, we've got choice. And what do you think the last, like if it was the top three, what's the third thing that people should absolutely know?
I think for me, it would be that water has memory, and that the quality of water has a huge range of difference, from water that will make you sick or even kill you to water that will really give your body the maximum quality that it needs to be running at peak performance. And if you think of when Europeans came to North America, for example, you could drink out of any body of water. Now we're very far from that. There's bodies of water coming out of the ground that are the pH of stomach acid. So it's really important to think not just about the water coming to you, but the water leaving you.
So the second part of that I get. I understand the idea that water is not only a filter, but it's a biological process that can improve or degrade that lifeblood itself. It's a bit cyclical in a thinking conversation. Not only is it the mechanism, but it's also the subject. But when you say water has memory, I want you to expand that a little bit more, because I can create a bunch of ideas in my head, but I want to hear from you directly. What do you mean?
Well, so water is a really strong dipole, which means it has its oxygen at one end and its two hydrogen at the other. And it's like this little fishtail thing. And based on those charges, it takes on these quite elaborate structures. And different water takes on different subatomic structure. And now they're starting to find out about quantum tunneling of water, and the base element that yields life on this planet, I would say, is very poorly understood. And it's holding on to a lot of things that are impacting. For example, another strong dipole is the human cellular membrane or living tissue membrane. And so how it can exchange through those dipoles is actually changed based on that structure. And so when you hear people talking about water having memory, usually that's something that they're speaking to.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think it was Miyamoto's work out of Japan that I always associate when people say water has memory. Water has the ability to create structure out of itself, out of the influences that come upon it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. But what you're speaking about is rather fascinating. Is there anybody within that field of looking at that idea of water as memory that you really applaud and look to and would direct other people to learn more about?
I would say Victor Schauberger, but there's not a lot of, but you really have to go to the original text, and there's a lot of people talking about his work that have put their own spins on it, some of which are more valid than others. And then there are people actually modeling the structure of water molecules as they coagulate, and that have been observing them. I can't remember the names, but I remembered it. There's scientific studies on it, peer-reviewed research, but it's been many years since I read it at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that. I've looked at some of Victor's work, and my partner is well versed and has almost all of the original texts. So now that you've said this, I'm like, okay, well, I actually have a library to
Nice.
go into and to understand. So
What a blessing.
yeah, I'm excited for that. So this was really the teaser of the longer conversation we're just about to have. And if folks are interested, there'll be a link or suggestion for that next video. Leaving people now, what's the send off, Zach? You know, you have the great thing about this type of medium is you have the ability to look out into the world and to give a message to folks. And we've given folks 3 really important things to think about: state change and phases. You can change, and the idea that water has memory or structure, and that structure has functionality. What would you leave people with now?
I would lead people with, go outside when it's raining. You know, everyone goes inside when it's raining, and the easiest way to start watching how water's moving through the landscape and what the different impacts, human and non-human creations, are having, the easiest way is to just observe it when it's raining. So get yourself a good rain jacket, and next time it's raining, don't run inside, run outside.
I love it. I love it. It's something that has been big in my memory ever since I heard Brad Lancaster say something similar when I was just getting into this work, to say, when it's raining, get outside.
Nice.
Go take a look. Go see what's happening. Observe, as Sepp Holzer, a main mentor of yours and a mentor of mine, likes to say, you know, the book of nature is always open. It's always open to read. And you can really only read that. That's so funny. We both had a little cell phone at the same time. When you're reading that book of nature, read it in such a way that you can't, like, read it when the book is open, so to speak, right? Go outside, take a look at it, because besides that, you're doing topographical assay, right? You're taking contour maps and you're understanding from a contour line perspective where the water flows. But nothing is as informative or as educational as seeing the water flow itself, because that is the most ground truth information you can get. The water collects here and disappears. Oh, that's interesting. I assumed it flowed overland. Mm-hmm. Or in another, I'm just thinking back to this property I just worked on, or in another area, this water all has a confluence here, but yet 2 of the tributaries don't flow. Oh, that's really interesting.
Absolutely. I just worked on a project where the contour map said the water from the road came into this property at the culvert, and the day it was raining, sure enough, the culvert was running the other way. And so you'll learn so much, and you have to be, you know, the book is always open, but the acts that you want to learn about aren't always happening. And so there's an awareness of time there that you have to use the different opportunities that you have.
Yeah. And that, I think that goes into was one of the things we'll talk about in the next video, is eligibility. You know, when are you eligible to learn? And, you know, first and foremost, we talk a lot about this, that mindset is the master eligibility, a prerequisite or key. If the mindset is open to learn, to listen, to understand, you're eligible to learn. You may not, but at least you're eligible. And if the mindset is closed and you walk outside, well, you're not going to learn anything. You're going to be so mixed up with the mindset of what's going on for me. What am I going to get? Where am I going to go? The ego is going to be running in overtime. You'll miss the conversation in front of you outright.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's really the first step.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Zack Weiss, Edelweiss. I think I'm going to say that every time now. I think it's going to be of Elemental Ecosystems. And Zack, thank you so much for joining me for this short little teaser. And thank you for joining me for the next video. Thanks everybody for listening. Zack, anything you wanted to say before I give people the final send off?
Just join us for the next video. I think it's going to be, that's when we're going to really start getting into the interesting pieces.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. If you found this useful, make sure to hit the like button. If you like this kind of stuff and you want more of it, hit subscribe and hit the little bell. And send me a bottle of scotch or Zach a bottle of scotch. We're totally fine for tips. Tips are no problem. Okay. Thanks so much. Be fruitful and multiply.